She is never afraid to share her story with the world and has won the Cross of Merit from 3 Polish presidents. She is never, ever afraid to share her voice, and her voice serves as a reminder to all of us that through sheer will and the grace of God, one can survive anything. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce you to my friend, Bozena Gilbride.
My name is Bozena Urbanowicz. I'm a Polish Catholic Holocaust survivor. I was born in Poland. My family were farmers. I'm the oldest of 4 children. I was born in 1934. If you're counting on your fingers how old I am, don't. I'm 84. I remember when I was about 8, 9, in school, we were told we were communist occupied at that moment in history. We were told that the communists are going to inspect our school, and children, they're going to ask you questions, and this is how you're going to answer. I didn't understand any of this as children. We were just doing what we were told. I remember when the communists came to our school, they asked questions, and one of the questions was, children, this is Christmas time. The communists said, children, and who gives you candy at Christmas time? And we were taught to shout, Papa Stalin gives us candy. Stalin was the communist dictator in Russia at that time. And they would reward us. They would throw lemon drops. I still remember the Polish name for lemon drops, landrynki. It's in my head forever. We were not allowed, but it was suggested we don't go to church. We didn't occasionally, but in summertime I remember going to church barefoot. And we would stop at a friend. My father had a Jewish friend, Mr. Friedman, who lived just a few doors from the church. And we would stop at Mr. Friedman's house and shake the sand off our feet and put our shoes on and go to church. My father knew Mr. Friedman because farmers in those days, they would take their wares, their produce, to the little city called Tuchin, and you would sell your produce. And there was one time Mr. Friedman needed some produce and didn't have money, and he gave my father white galoshes. You know what galoshes are, right? The rubber boots, very high, perfect for working, I guess, but they were white. I was on a farm, so white, I didn't want to spoil them, so I put them on a shelf. I never wore them. I also remember 1943, when I'm 9 years old, grown-ups were very afraid of things. They didn't tell us what it was. I remember we would sleep out in the forest. One of the adults would climb a tree and be the lookout. The next night, somebody else would be the lookout. We didn't understand any of this. Why? I remember one time, my mother said, Franek didn't come home last night. The Ukrainian nationalists, UPA, the initials were UPA, UPA. The Ukrainian nationalists probably caught him and killed him. The Ukrainian nationalists were not our neighbors. We had Ukrainian neighbors. They were no part of this. The Ukrainian nationalists at that time were making a deal with Hitler that if the Ukrainian nationalists, because in my area of Poland, far eastern end, we had many Ukrainians. Our neighbors were Ukrainians. My nanny, who came to take care of us during harvest time, she was a Ukrainian girl with very long braids that I loved to undo and then do it over again. When they found Frank the next morning, there was a pitchfork in his chest. He was killed. The Ukrainian nationalists, making a deal with Hitler, they wanted, everybody wants to be free. The Ukrainians wanted their own country. They wanted to be free of Russia. So they made a deal with Hitler. We'll help you kill the Poles and Jews in our area if you help us to win our freedom. Of course, the Nazis said, yeah, go ahead, kill those people. They had no intention of helping Ukraine. The Ukrainians have their own free country. They had no intention. That summer, August 1943, I'm 9 years old. We can't sleep. My father decides he doesn't want to sleep outdoors anymore. He says finally in August, late August, he said, we're all staying home tonight. We're sleeping in our own beds. And I remember that night, our neighbor, next door neighbor, ran over around 11 o'clock at night, and my bed was under the window. And I hated that window because right beyond that window was the chicken coop, the roosters were there, and that stupid rooster cock-a-doodled me every morning, waking me up very, very early. That night, the neighbor rapped on the window, and I remember, this was summer, the windows were open, our neighbor calling my father, Victor, Victor, this is the night. My father knew what that meant. Quickly, we all got out of bed in our little white nightshirts. And my mother said to me, Bozena, go get the sweaters off the hooks in the kitchen. And so I went, but to reach the hooks, I would have to climb on top of the bench that was there. And as I'm trying to do that, my family, my mother, father, my brother, and 2 sisters are going out the door. And I didn't want to be left in a dark kitchen by myself. So I didn't get the sweaters. I was terrified to be left behind. And I followed them from the back door through the little driveway there onto the street. And my father said, let's go this way. There's a bridge, we'll cross over, we'll be safe. But as we looked deeper, further in that direction, the village was burning. So my mother said, we'll go to Grandma's in the opposite direction. When we started to walk around the bend, we noticed that that end is burning too. The UPA was burning us from both ends. My mother grabs my sister, who was about 3 years old, in her arms. She tells me to hold on to my brother Chester and my sister Irene and follow her, and she dives into the wheat field, and the wheat was quite tall by then. But my mother was able to walk much faster. I couldn't keep up with her because the 2 little ones that I was dragging didn't run fast enough, and I was tripping in the wheat. The wheat would tangle around my ankles, I would fall on my face. By the time I stood up, my mother was even further away. And I'm terrified. I can't call out because they could hear me from the road. We weren't that far from the road. Suddenly I hear somebody crunch, crunch the wheat. Somebody's behind me. I am terrified, and I can't call to my mother. Suddenly Mama did turn around, and I remember she saw a man very close, right behind me, and I still remember how she gasped. Ah! She thought we were caught. Turned out to be my father. He lagged behind without saying anything to us, thinking he's going to return to the farm. So he went and opened the stables and to let the animals out, thinking he's going to get back to the farm. We never did. That night we slept out in a wheat field, and I remember it was very close to Grandma's house. And I wondered, if Grandma's house is burning, then the trees, the woods would burn, and then the wheat field, and we'll be discovered, and they're going to kill us. It didn't go like that. We slept through the night. Early in the morning, we crossed over the river. It was shallow, and we found ourselves in an open field. And they started to shoot at us. We all fell to the ground. We had neighbors with us. We were not alone at that moment. And we just pulled ourselves over to the next forest. And in this particular forest, an aunt of mine, my father's sister, lived there. It was very eerie that morning, very quiet. My mother and father said, stand still, so the four of us kids stood still. My father went into the house, opened the door, nothing, nobody home. And we didn't know if they survived or not. So we started to walk away, and to get off their property, we had to go around a pond they had. As we're going around the pond, 3 bodies stand up. My father was terrified because he was the first to see that. It turned out to be my aunt and uncle and their teenage son. They spent the night in the pond hiding. We left them, through the woods, we went to another aunt's home, my father's other sister. Nobody home, chicken, geese, the doors were wide open, chicken, geese running through the house. My mother took us in. She found some warm clothes. At that moment, I didn't know yet. My father left us there in that house, and he went to check on a farm. I don't know what he was thinking. It was so dangerous. He went and didn't come back, and my mother was getting worried. He's not back yet. Maybe they killed him on the road. Eventually, my father did come. It was a funny scene because he came. My mother walked out of the house and met him halfway, kind of. And he came, and he was carrying a chicken. He killed a chicken, figuring we'll roast a chicken, you know. That's funny. We went back into the house. It was time to leave. My mother made us some food, something to eat. And I still remember when I'm 9 years old, my favorite food was bread and butter sprinkled with sugar. It was my favorite food. I don't do that anymore, but that was my favorite food then. We walked out of that property onto the main road, and where throngs and throngs of people suddenly all being marched toward the city of Równe in Poland. I don't remember seeing uniforms, but I know there were men who were telling us faster to move along, stay together, move along. Eventually, we wound up in the city of Równe by a railroad station. It was getting like 5, 6 o'clock. There, they told us, the Ukrainian nationalists, UPA, they told us that we can sleep in a warehouse or outside. It's August, it's still warm. My father said, we're not going inside that warehouse, it's a trap. We slept outside. That evening, the Ukrainian nationalists, this was a trick, it was a ruse. They told us, the Ukrainians are going to come back and finish you off. And I remember that we were given, the young Polish people, older than you, were given guns to defend themselves that night. Now, the people who told us that they're going to come and kill us, I don't know. My thinking was that they were Germans. They spoke German. I didn't see uniforms, but they spoke German. That night there was a lot of shooting. The Ukrainian UPA did come back to finish us off, and the young Polish people were shooting back. I even remember my father pushing my head into the ground because I was always a curious child. I wanted to see who's shooting at us. My father would push my head down and say, Bozena, keep your head down, keep your head down. In the morning, they took the guns from the young people, and we were told, you can stay here, but UPA will come back to finish you off. But you can go to Germany. It will be good in Germany. You'll have food, you'll be warm, you'll have a place to live. That was not an invitation, that was an order. And I remember suddenly, I'm a farm girl, I've never been on a train. Suddenly there are cattle cars, trains with open doors, and they're pushing people in. Schnell, 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 faster, faster, move, move, move. It's the first German word that I heard. Inside the cattle car, it smelled terrible. There were just little slits in the walls there for a little bit of air. You couldn't see anything, it was too high. And it smelled from cattle. We were packed very tight. And the only thing I remember, you can imagine what it smells like when you're traveling for 2-3 days, sanitary. I only remember one thing in that cattle car. There was a young Polish girl with an infant baby in her arms, and she was begging people, please give me elbow room, I want to nurse my baby. I don't remember anything else in that cattle car. My father told us later that we traveled 2-3 days. The train would stop on the tracks often, but the doors never opened. It would stand there for hours and then continue. We wound up in Germany in a city called Freiburg. There, again, the cattle cars, the doors would swing open, loud, loud, schnell, schnell, the Germans are screaming at us. And we jumped onto the platform, and they started dividing us into groups. And I remember that I stood with my mother at the open door, and some people didn't come down yet onto the platform. And I said to my mother, if they don't hurry up, they're going to be left behind. And my mother said, not to worry, just move along. They were dead. I didn't know that at that moment. We found out later. We were taken to our group, I don't know, about 20 people or so. They took us to an old school building or theater. We were on the second floor. There were no beds. We slept on the floor. We would roll up our schmatas, clothes, like a pillow, and lay against the wall. The adults worked in a leather factory, making boots, belts for the Nazi front. We children worked the field. It was already like September, beginning of September. We would clear the fields for the German farmers so they can plant something else. It was getting cold. We didn't have the right kind of clothes. I became very sick. My mother asked at the factory to look in on me. Nobody wanted to. Eventually, I would just lay on the floor. I couldn't even walk anymore. I was so weak. A German man came. I found out later he came from the factory. He came upstairs, metal steps to the second floor, and he came to me laying on the floor, and he said, come. I already knew I am to obey. I followed him down the metal stairs, and the rail was middle. It was cold, and I remember I hated those steps because there was no backing to the steps. And I always thought I was so wobbly on my feet that I would fall through the hole and I'll get hurt. I didn't fall. When I got down, there was a little dark car waiting. He put me in the back seat and took off. And I don't know if my mother and father know that a man came and took me. And I'm terrified. I'm sick as a dog. I can't concentrate. I remember thinking as he was driving, looking out the window and thinking, but I couldn't carry a thought in my head. I just couldn't carry a thought. I was thinking, if I have an opportunity, I'm going to run. But I don't know where I am. I'm in Germany. I don't know this country. I don't know anything. Eventually, we got to a little city. The car stops, and I'm thinking, maybe he's going to take me to a hospital because I see a great big building on that side. Could be a hospital, 7 stories high, you know. But it wasn't. He turned a little to the left and handed me over to 2 women standing in the doorway of a very low building, like a ranch house would be, something like that. He hands me over and he says, "This is a place for people like you." I didn't know what kind of people I was. The 2 women took me inside. The man with the car left. They shaved my head because I was infested with lice. They took my clothes and put me in a little white shirt. And they took me to a room. The room had 4 beds. I think it was 4. On this side and on that side, and 1 window. I was very sick. They put me in that bed on the left side, and I wanted to see something through the window. I wanted to see people walking, or cars, anything, but I was too weak. I couldn't go to the window, and I couldn't see from the bed. I was too weak. It turns out that I had TB, tuberculosis. So they separated me from the workforce so I wouldn't infect the other children or grown-ups with my TB. I was so angry that I didn't know if my mother and father knew where I was, that I deliberately wet my bed on purpose. And I remember the 2 women, German women, coming, disgusted with me. They took me off the wet bed, bounced me on the dry bed, changed the sheet, and bounced me bed, and I kept my eyes shut. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing that I'm awake and that I'm aware that I wet my bed. I pretended that I didn't know what was going on. One time, I dreamt that my mother came to see me, and she sat on this side was a little wooden stool or chair. And she sat there and she was stroking my hand and talking to me. Oh, that was heaven to me. And I decided I'm not going to open my eyes. I want this dream to continue. Only after the war did my mother tell me that she did come to see me. She wanted to see if I was still alive. But I never opened my eyes to let her know that I'm okay, I'm okay. A different German man came to take me back. I was there my father said, about 3 months. A different German man came for me on a bicycle, and we had snow already on the ground. And I remember he put me on the handlebars, and the mud was splashing all over my legs, and I thought it was kind of funny. And when we reached our destination where my parents were, my siblings, I was holding on to the handlebars of the bicycle so tight that I had a hard time getting them free. And the German man helped me get my hands free, straighten my fingers, and we thought that was kind of funny. I went upstairs to where I was with my siblings. My mother asked if I could not go to work the next day. They said no, she has to go to work to clear the fields. When I got up in the morning, I had no shoes. Somebody stole my shoes. I wrapped my feet in rags like the other children were doing, and I went to work. It wasn't long in Freiburg. We were told we're being relocated. Horse-drawn wagons came, old trucks, and we took our rags, and we were in a truck, our family, my mother, father, and the 4 of us children. We were being taken someplace, and I remember we came to a road that we're supposed to cross, and we couldn't because a parade was going by. So my father lifted me up, and he said, Bozena, Bozena, look, it's Hitler. He was in a parade. And I couldn't see, he was too far ahead, but in front of me was a motorcycle, you know, the two-seater kind with the seat on the side. You occasionally still see them. I was so fascinated with that monster thing. I've never seen anything like that. I'm from a farm. I never had an occasion to be on a train or see a motorcycle. I was so fascinated with that motorcycle. I never did see Hitler. We were finally taken to a town called Chemnitz, Germany. That was all very organized. We were in a camp surrounded by fence and wire. The adults, we were in wooden barracks, and I remember my mother telling me, Bozena, those, look over there, those are gypsies. We had Ukrainians in that camp. It was a slave labor camp. The adults worked in a munition factory making torpedoes and all kinds of ammunition for the Nazis. We children didn't work, not in Chemnitz. What they did to us, German women would teach us the story, how wonderful it'll be in Germany when Hitler wins the war. We didn't care. I mean, we children don't understand these things. I remember one time I was sitting on this wooden bench behind a barrack with my siblings and other children. And we were supposed to come clean. Our faces were supposed to be clean and our hands clean, our hair combed. But I didn't care anymore at that moment. I'll tell you why I didn't care. And I wasn't clean, and I remember that woman grabbing me like this off the bench, and I tripped over my legs, and she just gave me a little kick. And this is what's going to happen to your children if you come dirty, if your hands are dirty. One day, the local German police comes to the factory and they arrest my father. He doesn't know why, he doesn't understand. And they kept saying something about this letter, you know, blah, blah, blah. And my father knows nothing. And he says, I don't know anything. They kept him overnight. They even beat him a little bit to get the information out of him. But he had no information to give them. They returned him to the factory for work. It was the men's shift, because the men worked the day shift. And they came in and took my mother. I still remember these 2 great big Germans in dark suits. It seems that my mother wrote a letter to her brother in another labor camp. How the Germans found it is still a mystery to us. In the letter my mother wrote, she criticized the Nazis, she criticized that the children need attention, they're not getting the food they need, all kinds of complaints. And the Germans, the Nazis, they read the letter. I don't know how they found it. And they realized that it's not my father that wrote the letter. In those days, my mother would sign J for Jane Urbanovich. And somehow they thought J was for my father, whose name is Victor. They took my mother, and I still remember those two German policemen that came. They were so big. My mother was small, short. And they're leading my mother away, and the four of us children are standing there. And my mother turns around to me, and she says, Bozena, there are 9 Deutschmarks, money, under the mattress, the straw mattress. What am I going to do with money? But to my mother, it was important that I should know that she hid some money there. They took her. We didn't know where to. When my father at the factory, the munition factory, asked where did they take my wife, nobody would talk. But one nice German foreman did tell my father. They took her, my mother, to Ravensbrück concentration camp. That's where she's going to go. He told my father, if you want to see your wife just one more time, I'll take you there. Very early in the morning when it's still dark. My father went, and they were laying, my father and the German foreman were laying in a ditch, and they saw the train there, and prisoners were being shoved into the train. And my father saw my mother walking so close to him, but he couldn't speak, you know. He could almost feel her breath. That's how close they were. And my father called my mother, Jane, Jane, Jane. She never heard him. And they took her to Ravensbrück concentration camp for women. We lost track of my mother completely. We had no idea where that was. We couldn't get out from that camp anyway. I remember I was so upset that I'm the mother, European custom, I'm the oldest. Now I'm to be the caretaker of the siblings. There was one time they were bombing the place, and the fence fell towards the camp, a solid wooden fence fell towards the camp. And I was always hungry. I decided I'm going to go and see what's there. Oh, when I got there, I knelt down, and I'm in a garbage dump. Where there's garbage, there's food. So I started to dig for food. I found some apple peels. I ate them right away. And I felt guilty because I couldn't find any more apple peels, so I found potato peels. Put them in my little skirt, and I'm standing up. I'm going to deliver it to the kitchen. We had a little stove, wooden stove in the corner of the barrack. I was standing up, and up on a little hill, there's a White House, like 2 stories, and on the second floor was a chandelier. And it struck me so funny that I'm in a garbage dump looking for food, and somebody lives with a chandelier. I brought the potato peels and I gave it to some woman in the barrack. I don't know what she did with it. I never cared. I didn't care anymore. I didn't have a mother. Other kids had a mother. I didn't care about anything anymore. Didn't matter. I didn't want friends. I didn't want to talk to other people, just my own siblings. Eventually, the Nazis, they took us. They told us we're being relocated. They took us out of the camp with horse-drawn carts and trucks. They took all of us, the whole camp, outside of the city of Chemnitz. Told us to get out. We lined up on the sidewalk, and the guards said, walk, march, go find the American front. We didn't know which way is the American front. We walked, we slept in the forest. I remember eating mushrooms that my father knew. He was a farmer, so he knew. And berries of sorts. I remember one German housewife, a woman, came out and she told our little group, don't go over there in the field. The field is mine. Stay on the concrete roads. Eventually, the German people avoided us, really. One lady did invite us inside her kitchen, and she fed us, and she told us to leave through the back door. She didn't want neighbors. It was a dangerous time in history, you know. Eventually, we marched and marched. We found the American front. The Americans didn't know what to do with all these homeless people. They put us in a DP camp, displaced persons camp. There was a young Polish priest, survivor. He taught us religion. And I received, a friend of my father's, a woman, had a white tablecloth from Poland. There's a long thing about these Polish people with their white tablecloths. We have something going there. She made me my Holy Communion dress, my sister's, and a shirt from one tablecloth for my brother for Holy Communion. I don't remember my Holy Communion. I don't remember. It's like wiped off my memory completely. I have a picture, it's in a book, but I don't remember that day. For confirmation, I chose the name, in that DP camp, I chose the name Mary, because I thought she'll be my mother, in case I don't have a mother anymore. But I remember nothing else except that I chose the name Mary for confirmation, because I had no mother. I was jealous of the other girls who had mothers. It killed me, because they had a nice friendship, the girls with their mothers. I had nothing. I had nothing. Eventually, UNRWA, United Nations, the American organization UNRWA, was helping us. And they asked us, what do you want to do now? The war is over. Do you want to stay in Germany? Or go to your own country? Poland for us. But Poland is now communist. And my father said, I can't go back to Poland, it's communist. I've had communism up to here. And I can't stay in Germany because I'm afraid. But we have relatives in America, but we don't have an address. My father gave the Americans what he knew, that our family relatives were in New York and Brooklyn. Americans, they did find our relatives. They told them that we survived the war, and my two uncles brought us to America. This is 1947. I am now 12 and a half years old. I never had a doll. I never had a best friend. I never had a ribbon in my hair like other girls did in Germany. I used to go to the local cemetery and steal ribbons off the graves. I would take them home and wash it, and then I would wind it around my finger and put them in a drawer. American girls at that age were not wearing bows in their hair anymore. They were a little more sophisticated by then. We lived with my uncle, and eventually my father bought a two-family home, and we settled. Where's my mother? Do I have a mother? Oh, or am I an orphan now? That's how I thought of myself. About a year and a half, 2 years after we're in America, we get a telephone. Jane, my mother, is alive. she's in Poland looking for us. Does anybody know what happened to Victor and the 4 children? And my uncle, who picked up the phone, he said, they're with me in Brooklyn. My father connected with my mother. I can't tell you that much because I would be crying, and so would you. But we did eventually get my mother out of communist Poland to America. And in the other book I wrote, Waiting for Mama, I describe how I managed to do that and how difficult my father made it for me. But everything worked out at the end. The reason I wrote the second book was that teachers and students were asking, what happened to your mother? Because in Children of Terror, I had to stop that, at a point, the book, because it was written with my girlfriend, who's a Jewish Holocaust survivor. But I did get my mother out, as hard as it was, and everything worked out. I paid for my mother's airline ticket. And this is something funny I want to tell you. I paid for the ticket, and I have a receipt, a copy of the receipt in a book. But when my mother got here, everything was fine with my father. He forgave her and all this stuff. My mother said, Bozena, your father is taking me down the street in Brooklyn and telling all the neighbors that it cost him $2,000 to bring her to America. It didn't cost my father a dime. Everything worked out just fine. But it was a very hard time. The reason for the second book was I wrote it as a teenager, what I was doing, because I thought if teenagers like yourselves would see how hard I had worked to do the right thing, you can do things like that too. All you have to do is make up your mind and make sure you know that you're going to pay a price for that, because that's the way it is. If you have questions, this is your moment. Yes? I didn't. It only cost me a few hundred. I was working by then. How did I get the $2,000? I didn't. My father was a very proud Polish man, so he pretended. My mother didn't know better, but she knew that there was no $2,000, and she didn't know that I did everything to get my mother out of communist Poland to America. My father didn't do a squat. But those were the times. You have to be understanding. That's how the world was. That's how we were after the war. Things were different. Like, for instance, my father figured that I'm the oldest, I'm going to take care of the siblings. When a nun in our grammar school complained about my brother, I think it was something, I don't remember what, we got a letter to my father from the sister, and the sister wants to talk to my father. And my father looked at the note, he says, Bozena, go. So I went. As soon as I got to the convent, sister opens the door. Oh, hello, Bozena, come on in. Before I knew it, she's sitting at the piano. She's teaching me how to sing certain Polish songs. I mean, we had a grand time. I came home, and my father says, Bozena, did you go to say sister? I said, yes. That's it. My father didn't ask any questions. What did she say? How did it work? Nothing. He trusted me completely. Somebody had a hand up? Yes? Do they talk about the Holocaust? No. No. As a matter of fact, when I first started 30 years ago, my siblings didn't even like it that I revealed our family's history. We were very private people. They thought that that's something you keep in your own family. But I always felt different. I always had a bigger picture of the world. That we have to step out of our own little cubicle and do something for somebody else. Even if you have to pay a price for it, but if you believe it's the right thing, you have to do it in a nice way. We don't quarrel. I tell the students that if you want peace on earth, you have to behave peacefully. Don't quarrel. Talk to each other. If you want to have respect, show everybody what respect looks like. You be respectful first. That's how things would work. But the world is so crazy right now that we're forgetting all these good things that God taught us. The 10 Commandments are still the best thing going. Come on, give me more questions.
How old were you when the Holocaust started?
How old was I? Well, it started in 1939, so I was born in 34. I was but I didn't understand. Even when the communists came to our farm to take our produce away, we were not allowed to kill a cow for meat, you know. So neighbors would get together at night and they'd kill a cow. A neighbor's not going to snitch on you if you don't snitch on him. So you had to figure it out. Do I still speak Polish? Oczywiście. Pewnie, że mówię po polsku. A ty mówisz po polsku? No.
So how were you related to the guy that got
We were not related to the guy who got stuck with the pitchfork. He was a neighbor, just a neighbor. Yes?
why did that guy help you when you got hurt or you were sick? Why did he help you out?
Because I had tuberculosis. That's contagious.
You were on.
That's right. He was smart. He knew what he was doing. Yes? Tuberculosis. TB. It's contagious. So they separated me from the workforce. I think, when did I realize the war was going on? I think when we got to Germany and we saw the Nazi soldiers and guards, that's when I knew. But children in those days, it's not the way we think about war now. We thought differently. Oh, I thought it was something adults did. They were fighting each other. I didn't go any further than that. Yes? Excuse me? How did I recover from what? TB? They must have done something because I still have a spot on my lungs. My doctor one time asked me, what is that spot on your lung? That's the remains scar from my TB. Yeah.
I know the whole thing was difficult, but what do you think was the most individually difficult part of surviving?
For me, personally, being separated from my mother. I can survive anything. I can sleep on straw. I can be hungry. I'll figure things out. But not to have my mother and not knowing where she was, that was the most difficult thing for me. Yes?
What did you eat in the concentration camps?
A set slave labor camp. What did we eat? I remember soup, very watery, turnip soup. Turnips were growing everywhere at that time. And that was there was no bread. I don't remember seeing bread. I got milk once in a tin cup, and we were supposed to walk up to this person who was pouring the milk. And I thought I was going to get a full cup. So when they filled it, I gently lowered my cup, not to spill it, and there was only about this much milk. Yes? The pictures, okay. This picture, first things first. This picture, it's in a book too. I enlarged it. This, John? Johnny, where are you? Honey, would you hold it? In this picture, this is the barrack in the slave labor camp. My bed was someplace by this window, below the window, bunk bed. It was a bunk bed. You were not allowed to have cameras, but somebody in our camp snuck in a camera, and they took this picture. I remember posing. This is my mother. My brother, Cheswa. My sister, Irena. Irene. My baby sister, Christine. She was only about 3-4 years old, 3-4, Christine. And the one with that beret hat covering her hair because they shaved my hair and started to grow, that's me. That was just before my mother was arrested and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp for women. But this is in the book. There's more about that. I have no clue who that is. I told you that I was making no friends. I clung to my mother, my father, and my siblings. I really didn't want to have friends. There was no point. I was sad all the time. I'm sure they wouldn't want me for a friend anyway. Pictures of children, teenagers, who were in concentration camps. There was a concentration camp just for Polish children. Polish children were kidnapped off the street if they were blonde, blue-eyed. Germany wanted them to be adopted into Germany, the parents who wanted children. And who I passed for German children. There were girls and boys just about your age, in uniform. Are you scared yet? What hate did, does, and will do if we don't change? Take a good look. This is how they measured the Polish children. It says Polish, Poland, to see if they would be the difference between the master race, these slaves. They measured. This is all bunk. It's been disproved by scientists much later. It's all bunk. But that's what they did. I made a copy of this famous saying, "Kill without pity or mercy all men, women, and children of the Polish race and language. Only in such a way will we win the vital space that we need." My pact with Poland was only meant to stall for time, be hard, be without mercy. The citizens of Western Europe must quiver in horror. Now, Hitler's aim was to enslave, get rid of the Poles. I think I read someplace 85%. He wanted 85% of the Polish people to be gone, and the 15 would be slaves for the Germans. When the war began and they were grabbing Polish people and putting us in camps, he did promise the Germans that they can be way own Poland. You will have anything you want. Just go and settle in Poland. Start the settlement in Poland. And the German, we have pictures, German women in elegant clothes, fur coats, fur hats, coming off the train, elegant, into Poland to take over restaurants, hospitals, whatever they wanted. Some Germans said, this is garbage, we don't like any of this, we're going back. But that's what hate does to people. They lose their minds. They're so full of hate. Any more questions? Yes.
When did you learn English?
When did I learn English? When I came to Greenpoint, I don't know if anybody knows Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and I went to a Polish Catholic school, and they were the sisters there. My favorite sister was Sister Azaria and Sister Boniface. They were both good sisters for me. What they did in those days for us immigrants who were learning English, there was a moment in the class where one of the girls, and we're still friends, Christine Bobrek, would take me in skrytka, that's the closet. The closet in those days had two doors. It had books inside. And you went inside, took your coat, hung it up, and went out through the other door. That's the way everything was very orderly. Christine Bobrek would take me into that closet, into the skrytka, and she would teach me English, and I would teach her Polish. So it was kind of reciprocal. That's what we were doing in those days. But it all worked out. I was too old to be in the grammar school, so I went to the local junior high school. And now I'm about 14, 15 years old. In that school was the most handsome teacher you have ever seen. Gorgeous guy. Blonde, curly hair. And he liked me. I liked him. I was embarrassed every time he came into the classroom. We, out of respect for teacher, we would stand up when an adult teacher entered. That's respect. So anyway, Mr. Goldsmith, that I had a crush on. Okay? He was a Jewish guy, gorgeous, just gorgeous. One day, after me standing up every time, I was like a jack in a box, you know, he enters and pop, Bozena's up, you know. One day, he gives me a note and he says, would you take this note to some teacher in another room? I said, yeah, but I was suspicious for some reason, I don't know. I thought maybe he's going to make fun of me that I pop up like jack in a box every time he enters the classroom. So I went outside into the corridor, and I was curious, do I really want to bring that note? I don't know what it says in the note. I don't know if I want to bring it. So I unfolded the note, and I read it. It said, this will introduce you to Bozena Urbanowicz. She's a gem. I said, oh my God, I'm a gem. I don't even know what that means. Oh my God, I'm a gem. Oh my God, I don't know if I want to bring that note to the teacher or not. I'm debating. I did bring the note, I did. Right after school, I grabbed my books and I run into the nearby library to the dictionary. And in those days, the dictionary would be on a kind of a pedestal, great big dictionary. And I know how to spell gem because I saw it written. So I go to the page G and I find the word gem. I read it, thought for a second, I said, okay, I'm a gem. That's the kind of experiences we had. But I loved Mr. Smith, I did. He was such a nice guy, really. And I survived that too. Yes.
Where did your brothers and sisters live?
Where did my siblings live?
Yeah.
My baby sister, Christine, became a nun. Sisters of the whole family of Nazareth. My brother died about 8-9 years ago, had a heart attack, died. I still have one sister, Irene. She's, we're the only two left from my family. Everybody else is gone now. Irena. She lives in Queens. She didn't want me to talk about our life. She thought it was too personal to reveal everything. I didn't really reveal everything. If you want to know more, you'll have to do a follow-up with the next book, Waiting for Mama. It'll tell you more. How long have I been talking about the Holocaust? A little over 30 years. When? In Germany? They had Polish-speaking guards for us. Oh, yeah.
Before this, what did you do as a job?
What kind of a job did I have? My most important job was being a mother to 4 children. That's first. I was involved in fashion industry. I ran my own boutique place when I was married and had children. I couldn't leave the house to go to work. I did my own clothes. I designed and made, and I sold. Say that again?
How old are your children?
My children? You really don't want to know. My children, my goodness, one is about 60, the oldest, 61 or 62. And then there's another one, and then there's another one, son. And then at the very end was a little girl, my daughter. And I thought I had enough children. And my husband I wanted to name her Christine. My husband said, no, we name her Quiz. No more children. It's too hard. The money wasn't there. But, yes.
When you got into college, when did it come to mind? Were you too weak to think that you were getting kidnapped? Or did you just think you were getting taken to sea?
Say that in a shorter way.
When you got into college again, do you think he was going to kidnap you, or he was like going to take you to sea?
Kidnap me. No, I thought that was my thought. Yes? Oh, I've been to Poland many times. My book, my husband and I wrote this book together. But all the credit for this book goes to my German Jewish girlfriend. She wanted this book. She bugged me for about 10 years, and I said, no, no, no. Finally, I relented, and we did it. The book came out in English. Then I went ahead and translated in Polish, and it's also in German. So I went for the book signing session to Poland with the Polish book. Then we went together. No, we went together for this too. Then we went to Germany when the book came out. The publisher invited us, and it happened to be at the time of the Leipzig Book Fair, and we were a very big hit. I didn't realize it until much later that I'm talking in Germany, they were very interested that we wrote this book together about the Holocaust. Some people think that we shouldn't have done that, but who cares what they think? The book is the only one of a kind. There's no other book like it on the market. So what's there to feel bad about? We don't feel bad. She doesn't, neither do I. camps, you mean, we did, oh, they would come up with adults. Eventually, they would send you to a concentration camp from a slave labor camp if you disobeyed. That's what they did with my mother. How dare she write a letter and complain about the treatment? Yes?
Are we allowed to ask questions? Having lived through everything that you've lived through, what is your biggest fear when you look at the way the world is today?
You don't want to go there.
Okay.
The way the world is now, I think we're in an awful lot of trouble. People don't talk to each other, they shout, they fight. Why can't you talk? Why can't you keep talking and talking and talking until you get to some agreement? But they don't, the world is not like that anymore. I have to tell you that being 84 years old, I'm so glad I am 84. I really am. I don't want to, you are in for a big surprise, your generation. You're going to have to work very, very hard against hate and what's going on. Very hard, but hold on to what your parents taught you, what you learned in school as Christians, as Catholics. Hold on to that. You've got nothing better than that. There's nothing out there better than your faith. Nothing, trust me. And hold on to it. Hold on.
Yes. Bozena, I just want to say, I've known you for a long time. Like you said, you've been doing this for about 30 years, and I've known you about that long. This is the lady that I meet all over town, whether it be in Stop and Shop with this wonderful husband or in church or whatever. She's very, very proud of who she is. And this is a woman who has a story. Every time I was listening to you before, I'm thinking about Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie and her beautiful little stories about life on the prairie. I was thinking about Sound of Music, where everything's glorified with Maria, but the children, but again, what was the underlying story there was the war. Or reading the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yes.
You know, this is not just something that's concentrated in Poland. Bozena was from Poland, but it happened in Germany. It happened all throughout Europe. This is a time, it was a terrible time, it's before my time, but I remember reading about it in history. And I think what Bozena brought you today is her sense of storytelling, but her sense of reality. This was real for her. But I hope you listened. The word that kept coming up very often in the very beginning was respect. Right, her respect and also her wonderful faith. She is a woman of principle. She's a woman of values. And what she gave you today is an invaluable lesson. I know sometimes you probably think we're all quacks and we keep telling you to be good to each other, but we keep bringing people in from outside who are telling you the same thing. So if you're really smart, you're going to remember this day, remember this woman, remember what she gave you. And I really charge you to go forward in her honor and keep her sense of respect and her love of her mission really always in your heart. So Bozena, I just want to thank you. You did a lot for me today. I've heard you before, but today was very special, and I thank you for that.
I love, you didn't see, you're in the back, but I'm up front. The faces on them, like they've never heard this part of the story. Now, just to bring you up to par, the Holocaust Museum recognizes 11 million victims of the Holocaust. 6 million were Jews. Jews suffered the most. That's a given. I mean, you can't deny that. So don't you want to know who were the other 5 million people? Now, when I spoke at the Holocaust Museum with my girlfriend, we were invited to speak to the tour guides. And we were sitting at a table, and the tour guides were this way. And I don't know what question came up from one of the tour guides, and my Jewish girlfriend stood up, and she said, Bozena doesn't like it when you call her others. 6 million Jews perished, and others. I'm not others. I'm a human being. I have a name, a face, and a shared history of the Holocaust. That's who I really am. I'm not others. Others means you're faceless. You have no face. You're just others. So when she started to talk, my Jewish girlfriend, I pulled her down, sit down. I said, I'll talk for myself. And I told them, don't call me others. Give me a name. Call me by my name, who I really am. Remember leaving the room in a corridor, one of the tour guides ran over and grabbed me from behind and hugged me, and she said, Mrs. Gilbride, I will never use the word others when I give a tour. When you see Polish history, say so. You see Jehovah's Witness, say so. Tell the students, this is how it was. It wasn't 6 million with a big period. That's a disservice to the rest of us. You have to know what hate did to all of us.
Do you think you'll ever make a movie on the book you wrote?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Do you think you'll ever make a movie about the book you wrote?
I don't know. I'm giving all the rights to my books, both books, to my sons. They know what to do. There have been some, there was a little interest in a movie, and we had a movie maker come to my house here in Southampton, and there's a clip in the movie of me, my girlfriend and I decided, my Jewish girlfriend, we decided that when they do that film, I'm going to say the Our Father in church, so the camera followed me to Our Lady of Poland church, and I'm saying my prayer in Polish, the Our Father, and my girlfriend, they took, in her house, they took a counterpart of my saying the Our Father in Polish. She was supposed to say the Our Father in Hebrew, but she forgot how to, she was so nervous, she forgot, so she had to read it. She said, I was so ashamed that I didn't remember it by heart, but I was shaking. So it's in the film. I mean, we try to bring peace on earth, respect for both sides, you know.
Mrs. Gilbride, John has something he'd like to give you. And if I could ask, I'd like to call the names of the children who pre-ordered the books. You just come on up and just stand next to you, Mrs. Gilbride. So if you hear your name, please come on up and we'll take a photo. Chase Rodriguez, Amanda Guzman, Sean Collier, Bridget Bernal, Richard Barone, Sophia Oliveri, Jack Cantwell, Harrison and Evelyn Hanley. Oh, you want them all? Okay, well, we'll do that. Yes, we can do that too. Yes, okay, so she wants to have, let's have this side come on up first. So this side will come up first around you, and then we'll get them to come behind you. So let's have all the kids come up, but let's start on that side. Come on up around. Stay here, Amanda. Stay here. And then this side, come on up on this side, okay? Big picture of all of you.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I took her camera. So she's good. A lot of it.
It should be on.
Yeah, I'll just stay.
Okay. It's crazy hard there for us. It's all right. It shows we're humans. It's on here.
Scrunch. Come on, everybody, scrunch. Closer, closer, closer. You don't want to miss your face.
It's hard.
Are we there yet?
And kids, let's say a big thank you, right? Let's say a big thank you. Thank you so much. Right? Very nice.
Okay. Santos, would you take a picture
Yeah,
now?
with John.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, well said.
Oh, you have her camera, that's hers.
I
Yeah.
actually, I did zoom in.
Can you get maybe the first one of her on? That's what she wants.
No, I don't.
course, yeah. Oh, there she is with John, yes. We're fine. We're fine. It's not bad. Okay, guys. Your Rapid City's going to he'll take us. Yeah, that's perfect. And then we'll have somebody come up and get their votes. It's that. Oh, it's time.